you check the children? Show a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Fright fans. Jaime and Fuego here, and welcome to the horror show. And this is a long gestating Patreon review for a film called Unwelcome. And even though it was a recent suggestion from Sam Glass, this is a film that's been on my personal radar when I initially heard about it. I think it was briefly in theaters, if I'm not mistaken, and then it had the VOD rollout, but it is now currently on Shudder. And this is from the director of Grabbers, and it stars the girl who I guess many people will, I'm trying to remember if it's Heather John Kamen, I want to say her name is, but she was on a great episode of Black Mirror. That was maybe the first thing that I ever saw her on. She was the villain in the second Ant-Man film. She was also in a underrated action film that I really dug that had the big burly homie from Umbrella Academy, and it was called SAS Red Notice. But yeah, so she's got a lot of stuff under her belt. She was Jill Valentine in the Welcome to Raccoon City as well. So she's a face that you will recognize, even though she's probably more prominent on the other side of the pond with British television audiences. But so Unwelcome is from the Grabbers director, and whereas that film was very much like jovial and silly, and I mean not really on the supremely serious side, this film is getting a lot of attention from certain other peeps in the scare sphere, as I like to call it. And I'm kind of mixed on this one if I'm going to give overall feelings, because it's a little more on the scatterbrain side, because there are definitely times where I feel like it is trying to be serious and it actually is effective, most notably at the very beginning of the film, which story-wise, this is about a traumatic situation that happens to our aforementioned lead lady and her husband, in the fact that they are trying to have a child, and they've obviously been making the attempt for a while, as some of the amusing banter between them implies, but he goes to celebrate and get a bottle of bubbly at the little corner market, whatever, but they're in London, they encounter some thugs, and it turns into a very scary and effective thriller home invasion sort of situation, insanely traumatic. And then we fast forward after this very effective situation into the husband having inherited from an aunt, if I recall correctly, this home in Ireland. And so in a rural area, small town, beautiful scenery, great looking home, primarily on the exterior, but it definitely, the roof needs some patchwork and there's some other things that need to be done, but still owning it outright. And the laughability in the seriousness doesn't really come until later, but I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around this movie, because it's like a few different films in one. So the promotional material, and if you read the synopsis and stuff, it lets you very much know that this is kind of a creature movie, in the fact that, and you even see it on the poster, there's little elf, leprechaun looking homies, and that's a part of it. Okay, because there is, at this property that this couple has inherited, there is an offering that needs to be given on the daily, like a blood offering. So whether it's little pieces of liver or whatever, and this is something that has apparently been happening for years and years and years with the aunt, up until when she deceased. And so there is a friend of the aunt that passed away that lets our lead lady that I mentioned and her husband know that you better keep doing this, or else there's going to be some pretty dire consequences. And so the film plays out as that being half of the story, but then the other half of the story is this rebuilding crew that is led by O'Brien from TNG and DS9, and it's so funny to me seeing him in these roles that he primarily plays, which is asshole Irishman. If you guys have seen Con Air, I can't remember if he's sporting the accent in that, but he does a lot of these really hardened, vulgar sort of guys, and seeing him in such a subdued role initially when I was a kid on Star Trek, it's just really kind of funny. But yeah, so he's the head of this crew that is doing this work on their home, and his kids are a part of it, and they're total shitheads, total schmuck bags. The daughter, both of the sons, one of the sons is kind of mentally handicapped, almost like M-O-O-N, that spells handicap, that sort of vibe. But so that plays in with, that crew, they get more and more overstepping their boundaries. It turns into abuse, and then it turns into extreme just hostility and nastiness. I'm not trying to spoil anything here, but so that aspect of like just reliving trauma through these, increasingly aggressive and abusive people it's tied in with that situation from the beginning of the film. But then yet we also have that B plot of these little leprechaun homies that look very much like, once we do finally get them, and it takes forever to get to them too, almost half the movie. So yeah, once we finally do get to them, it's very similar to anybody who has seen Cat's Eye, the Stephen King short story, the adaptation anthology from the 80s. It's almost an identical look in many ways to the little troll elf leprechaun thing that is terrorizing and goes against the cat, if I remember correctly, in the third and final story, the only original one from that too. So you get that sort of look, and it's really, after taking itself quite seriously and having like some witty, amusing banter and whatnot, the third act is where this shit goes so scatterbrained off the rails and kind of turns into maybe what I wanted it to be, but almost to the point of laughability, because there is death of certain characters, and I feel like it's supposed to be serious and have some sort of heft and weight, and yet a lot of it comes off as melodramatic and laughable, so I'm just like, am I supposed to be laughing here? I don't know. And it does bring the gore, so to touch on effects and whatnot, I like the design of these little, whatever the hell you want to call them, these green little people, leprechaun-y, evil whatevers, but and the gore, when it actually comes in, like pulling of like intestines out, and there's some just heads being blown off and all this different stuff. So the gore does come, and the design of these little guys is interesting because there's a whole troop of them. So I don't know. Once again, the movie is just kind of all over the place in a lot of ways. It can't figure out its tone. It tries to balance so many different aspects between that serious thriller backstory and then just the kind of silliness of the situation. So that's where I'm still, like, at least for me, the jury is out on this one. I don't really, it's tough for me to, say recommend or skip and, don't pay any attention to. Once again, boy, I keep wanting to say, I'll just say Cayman, all right? Because I keep thinking I'm flubbing her first name. But Cayman, she is very solid in this role until things get really laughable at the very end. And once again, I'm not spoiling, but there is a kind of plot twist sort of thing that goes down. Story-wise, though, I did like the backstory aspect of why the offering was being made in the first place. It's got kind of a Rumpelstiltskin sort of vibe to it, which I love that story, so, props on that regard. So I like that essence of the mythology in the storytelling, but it's really the fact that the acting veers into camp, whether intentional or unintentional, and that's another thing that really kind of left me scratching my head a little bit with this film in reference to the aforementioned tone juggling and whatnot. So it gets gory, it gets silly, sometimes when I don't necessarily know if it intended to. And so, yeah, I mean, from music, sound design, things of that nature, nothing that really stood out immensely or amazingly to me. The sound design more so, especially when we do get like the speaking and the voices of these little things, because it is rather amusing, and in those instances maybe it was supposed to be intentional. So a very peculiar follow-up from the director of Grabbers, which I loved, and yet, yeah, Unwelcome, it's strange, Sam. I gotta say, I know Sam Glass, a longtime supporter of the channel, you recommended this one. I'm assuming you recommended it because you dug it. I can't say I dug it, man. I enjoyed parts of it for sure, but it's definitely kind of a similar vibe that I got to a film called, goodness, not Sacrifice, Sacrament, whatever. There was another film that I watched recently, which was more on like the thriller, everybody's stuck in a room, well, our two characters stuck in a room sort of situation. But yeah, it's where I still am conflicted in a lot of ways about how I feel on it, and I've seen massive praise from certain peeps in the horror sphere once again. So that's where making up your own mind, art is subjective, checking it out yourself. Once again, streaming exclusively on Shudder, and Shudder's kind of sister companion network, AMC Plus. So if you have either of those, you can check out Unwelcome. And yeah, that's going to be the end of the proceedings here today. Gracias to all of our patrons, most notably Sam Glass, for recommending this one. I'm glad that I'm glad that I didn't spend the money to VOD it. I'm glad that I waited until it was on Shudder. But once again, to each their own. Sam, I'm assuming you enjoyed it, and props for the recommendation and finally getting me around to watching it. And yeah, if you guys would like to become a patron yourself, all of the info is in the description box below. So yes, help us keep the lights on here. It's great to be back to do a few of these. It's been a very strenuous spring and summer bit of sessions at Arizona State, but I'm glad that I was able to come out and film some more of these. There's at least a couple more coming in this filming today. So look forward to those, and look forward to more of these reviews coming from Cecil, Robert, all of the rest of the gang in the very near future. So I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and gracias, Fright fans, and until next time, remember, stay scared.